We can move on to the next act of worship that the Shaykh mentions. وَمِنْهَا الْخَوْفُ وَالْخَشْيَةُ تَعَبُّدًا وَتَقَرُّبًا. Right, so the next example act of worship is al-khawf, which is fear, al-khashya, which is awe, having awe of Allah, out of worship and seeking nearness. Right, so this is an important qualification. تَقَرُّبًا تَعَبُّدًا وَتَقَرُّبًا. We'll come to this shortly. So anyhow, the Shaykh goes on to mention very many verses from the Quran as an evidence. إِنَّمَا ذَلِكُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ يُخَوِّفُ أَوْلِيَاءَهُ فَلَا تَخَافُوهُمْ وَخَافُونِ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. Indeed, that is Shaitan who instills fear, puts fear into his awliya. So do not fear them. Do not fear them, but fear me if indeed you are believers. Surah Al-Imran, chapter 3, verse 175. And likewise, فَلَا تَخْشَوُا النَّاسِ وَخْشَوْنِ. Do not fear the people, but fear me. Surah Al-Ma'idah 5, verse 44. أَتَخْشَوْنَهُمْ فَاللَّهُ أَحَقُّ أَن تَخْشَوْهُ إِن كُنتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. Do you fear them? Yet Allah is greater, has the greater right that you fear Him, if indeed you are believers. Surah Tawbah 9, verse 13. And also the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, فَإِيَّايَ فَارْحَبُونَ, rahbah, which is like again a type of fear, that me alone should you fear, or fear me alone. And so here rahbah is like a type of fear. This is very similar to when Allah says فَإِيَّايَ فَاعْبُدُونَ, worship me alone. It's the same. So rahbah and ibadah. So all of these are texts to show that al-khawf wal-khashya and rahbah, all of these, like generally they are fear. They are an act of worship which should be directed only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And notice again the clear qualification. It is ta'abbudan and taqarruban. Right, so this is very different. So when you fear Allah, when you are fearing Allah because you want to be near to Him, you want to be close to Him, right? So you do an act of worship in your heart is khawf and khashya and rahbah, and the thing that you are doing, which is driven by the fear, is to actually become closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this now clearly is a ta'abbud, and it is taqarrub. However, when we look at fear, when it comes to the fear which is tabi'i, which is something which is natural, that we fear things in this world, this is not an act of worship, because when you fear something, like you might fear a scorpion, you might fear a lion, you might fear a violent person, or you might fear, when you have that fear, there's nothing of seeking nearness to that person. Like there's no taqarrub to that individual. You're trying to get away from that person, right? So there's nothing in the heart where the thing that you are doing, now somehow you want to become, no, of course that's not present. And that's what tells us a distinction between khawf and khashya, fear, which is ibadah, and khawf, which is tabi'i, which is natural, right? You have a natural aversion for certain things. It's like a survival instinct. You fear certain things. You fear hunger, you fear death, you fear violence from somebody, you fear a snake bite, a scorpion bite, you fear, many things that people fear. This thing, as long as it's natural and within the bounds and within the limits, and it's not exaggerated in, then this is something perfectly fine, as long as, so this type of fear, there's one qualification of that type of fear, as long as it does not lead you to abandon a wajib or to do something which is haram, then there's no blame upon a person for this type of fear, right? So in other words, like, yes, it's natural for you to fear sometimes the people of kufr and disbelief, they might bring some harm to you, they might, whatever. But that fear shouldn't be to the extent that it leads you to compromise your obligations, to leave a wajib or to do something which is haram. This now becomes khawf, which is muharram. Right? This is fear that is unlawful and prohibited, even though it's not the fear that becomes shirk. Right? The fear that is shirk is that you fear something or somebody whilst seeking closeness, taqarruban wa ta'abbudan to that person or to that thing. So these are the different types of fear. There's khawf, which is tabi'i. You fear a snake that you see, you want to run away from it. Right? This is tabi'i, perfectly normal. Or you might be in some situation, it could be, I'm trying to think of a scenario here, where your fear of the people of disbelief leads you to abandon an obligation that you don't want them to see you doing an obligation because you have fear of them. Well, this fear is haram, it's unlawful, this is a major sin. For you to leave an obligation because of the fear of the people of disbelief, no. And then there is the fear, which is shirk, which is the fear, which is where there's fear of a thing whilst simultaneously seeking nearness to that thing. Right? This is the fear which is shirk. The Shaykh goes on to explain that verse. إِنَّمَا ذَلِكُمُ الشَّيْطَانِ يُخَوِّفُ أَوْلِيَاءَهُ. Indeed, that is shaitan who puts fear into his awliya. So do not fear them, and fear me alone if indeed you are believers. Shaykh says, shaitan comes along to a man and he says, look at those kuffar, and look at how strong they are, look at how powerful they are able to harm you economically, they're able to fight you, they're able to do this, that, whatever, and puts all these fears into the hearts of the people of Iman. And as a result of which, as the Shaykh says, ثُمَّ يُوهِنُ عَزَائِمَهُمْ فَلَا يَقُومُونَ لِلَّهِ. Their resolve, their determination becomes very weak, and they don't stand for the sake of Allah, and nor do they become zealous and eager for da'wah to Allah, because shaitan has somehow put some fear into they're scared of speaking, and they're scared of, because they fear that maybe the kuffar might harm them physically or materially in terms of his wealth or whatever it might be. This type of thing, the Shaykh is saying, no. This is what Allah says, إِنَّمَا ذَلِكُمُ الشَّيْطَانِ. This is simply coming from shaitan to make you fearful of these people, so that you don't do that which you're supposed to do, of fulfilling the worship of Allah, or calling to Allah, or those other things. So the Shaykh says, in response to this, he says, فَأَوْلِيَاءُ الشَّيْطَانِ لَا يُقَاوِمُونَ أَوْلِيَاءَ الرَّحْمَنِ. The allies of shaitan can never ever face up to the allies of Ar-Rahman. It's not possible for the allies of Allah, who is Ar-Rahman, for the allies of shaitan to be able to face and stand up to the allies of Ar-Rahman. It's not possible. So therefore, why should we, the Shaykh is saying, why should we fear Awliya Ar-Rahman? However, he says, لكن يتخاذل أولياء الرحمن خوفا من أولياء الشيطان. Sometimes it can be the case that those who are the allies of Allah Ar-Rahman, they might desert and abandon their duties and responsibilities because of their fear of the awliya of shaitan. And this is because shaitan is the one who is instilling and putting this fear into their hearts. But فلو أن أولياء الرحمن اعتصموا بالله عز وجل ورأوا أن هؤلاء ليسوا بشيء بالنسبة إلى الله عز وجل ما تخاذلوا أمام قوة هؤلاء. If the awliya of Ar-Rahman were to hold fast to Allah Azza wa Jal, and they were to see clearly that these people who are the awliya of shaitan are absolutely nothing in relation to Allah. They have nothing, they have no power, they are nothing in relation to Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? Then they would not have deserted and made desertion and abandonment in front of the likes of these people. Because the strength of these people does not equal anything in relation to the strength and the power of Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah Azza wa Jal says in the Quran, أَوَلَمْ يَرَوْا أَنَّ اللَّهَ الَّذِي خَلَقَهُمْ هُوَ أَشَدُّ مِنْهُمْ قُوَّةً. Do they not see that Allah is the one who created them? He is more severe than them in quwwah, in strength. So the point being, how can it be that, because of fear that the people of disbelief put into the hearts of the believers, why should you be fearful? And why should you compromise on obligations? And why should you avoid speaking the truth and calling to Allah and speaking with justice, just because of the fear that these people have put inside your hearts? Who are these people? What power do they have? They have nothing. They have no strength compared to He who is the Lord of all of mankind. So there's no reason whatsoever to be fearful of speaking the truth and saying the truth. Right? Otherwise, this falls into a type of fear which is unlawful. It is haram. Right? So this is the end of the discussion of khawf and khashya and rahba. Right? So we know clearly the distinction between what is an act of worship and what is not an act of worship, and what is a permissible type of fear, which is tabi'i, which is to be fearful of harm to one's life, to one's limb, to one's health, which is perfectly natural and normal, as long as it is within the bounds of within the bounds of acceptability and what is justifiable. For example, obviously this is a whole separate different discussion, but some of the scholars, they do mention this example. For example, Shaykh al-Luhidan, he says, if you heard, for example, that there was a lion loose in the area, it makes sense for you to just go indoors. It makes sense because a lion can eat you and whatever. But if someone tells you there's a cat or there's a fox in the area or something like that, then obviously there's no reason to be fearful. This now is exaggerated fear, and this is not befitting for a believer to fear things that cannot be justified, like the way you exaggerate in the fear. And in fact, the Shaykh was speaking of this issue of khawf, giving this as an example in the context of contagion. And in the issue of contagion, there is this tremendous exaggeration, blown out of proportion, especially amongst the people of disbelief, and they use this as a weapon, as a tool, in order to achieve different objectives. But this is an issue in which this exaggerated fear that it would make a person to fall into something which is not praiseworthy or unlawful, right? And from the greatest of these things today is that you start fearing healthy people who have no disease. This is from the greatest of the fabrications of the people of disbelief that we have to reject, right? To fear a healthy person who has no sign of any disease, this has no basis in the Sharia, nor does it have any basis even in science, not even in science, right? Because even the whole idea of a person being asymptomatic and carrying the causes of disease, this really cannot be substantiated. It cannot be proven. In fact, all of the actual empirical evidence and science conducted in the 20th century has proven exactly the opposite, the exact opposite. Because all attempts to experimentally transmit a disease from one person to the next person by way of breathing, by way of sneezing, by way of fluids, by way of injection of the blood. This has been done with measles, has been done with chickenpox, has been done with the flu, has been done. All of these things have been done. They are in the scientific literature. But the problem is that we don't go back, we don't read the original source material, right? Very sadly, we are able to do it in the religion, right? So we go to the people of bid'ah and they mention to us a hadith and we say, oh, where's this hadith? What's the isnad? What's the takhrij? Because I want to check the source. right? And we diligently go and we look into the books of hadith, let's find the hadith, is it what's it, and we are able to verify very easily, sorry, this is da'if, we can't accept this, batil, false, sorry, no. Anything you built upon this is false. We're able to do that very, very, very easily. Yet when it comes to affairs of science, which actually have similar principles, right? So where can I find a documented example ever in history of the transmission of a disease from one person to the next person, proven by the implementation of the actual scientific method? Give me one example. Where can I see it? Well, you won't find one. You won't find one. There isn't a single example where it's been proven by the application of the actual scientific method. You won't find it. And you'll find the exact opposite, the disproven, right? So this is a bit of a diversion, but the point that we are making here is this putting fear into your hearts on false premises, on false grounds. This is something where our tawheed, the perfection of tawheed, not the foundation of tawheed, it can be compromised. And that's why we find these affairs being mentioned in Kitab al-Tawheed, things to do with like minor shirk, excessive fear, belief in omens, mistakes in causation in the asbab, and in that context comes the mention of contagion. And even the two acceptable views amongst the Muslims, which is either there is no contagion at all, and a thing does not transmit its illness to another thing. This is the truth, because every illness is in fact a separate individual creation in every entity. No entity transmits its own disease to anybody else. The disease is a state of that entity, right? There's no such thing as transmission of your own arad, to somebody else. If I have a cold, this is actually my cold and my flu. It's in me. It developed on account of numerous reasons. The cold weather, deficiency in certain nutrients, lack of sleep, whatever it might be, I've developed a cold or a flu, which is actually a healing mechanism in any case, right? And if that person got the cold or the flu, it's not that my cold and my flu jumped and went to him. No, because a thing does not pass what it has to another thing. But that cold was created afresh in that person through the asbab, by way of Allah's qadr. And this is the truth. This is correct and true. That's one view. And so therefore, when you keep away from other people who are ill, you are keeping away in order not to fall into belief in contagion, right? It's for you to not to fall into shubha and start believing in the contagion that the messenger negated, right? So that's one view, and that's actually the view that agrees with where the evidence is strong for that view. And the other view is that you keep away from a person so that to avoid transmission of the disease. In this view, many scholars hold that view, but this is in relation to a sick person was visibly sick with symptoms. It's not in relation to someone who's totally healthy with no symptom of disease at all. This does not exist in any of the views of the Muslims. This we have to reject. We cannot accept this, right? And we cannot say, well, Muslim health authorities, no, they are not a proof in this, right? It's the Sharia, because this view doesn't exist amongst the Muslims. It never has existed. This is an innovation of the people of disbelief based upon their speculative sciences, right? And just like someone can't say, well, Turkish government and the Pakistani government celebrate the Mawlid. Well, that's not an evidence. That's not an evidence. So in the same way, you can't say, well, so-and-so health authority in the Gulf or in the Far East or whatever, well, they believe, they say that we should do social distancing. Well, that doesn't become a proof, neither in religion nor in medicine or science. But obviously, from the principles of the Sunnah, we obey because this is obedience to the ruler in order to maintain order in the society. So we're not saying, we have to obey. But here we are speaking about whether a thing is correct or true just because it's the prevalent theory amongst the people of disbelief, or because some of the Muslims have, studied in the Western lands, taken the theories, gone back and started believing these things. No, that's not a proof for anything. It's not an evidence for anything. Right? And so as we are speaking about the issue of fear and khawf, this now becomes the blameworthy type of fear. It has no, and in fact, everything's been proven exactly like I said. Any case, it was all a fraud. It was all a con, right? All, it couldn't be any more clearer now. We could excuse people for being confused because you're in the midst of something, and it's hard to get access to knowledge, and there's the urgency of the thing, and now 3-4 years on, it's absolutely crystal clear. This was like a huge scam. And they just tried to scare people to take injections, and all of these things were just totally made up of distancing of 6 feet between the people. They weren't doing it themselves. There's no science behind it. It's just to create like a fake sense of fear, keep everybody fear of everybody else. This clashes with our religion. And I think everybody can see that now. Everybody can see that now. So we shouldn't fall for this again, because this thing hasn't ended. They're going to try and do this again and again and again, and to normalize this whole idea of, everybody is a walking disease, so therefore we need to have principles of biosecurity. This is just a way of controlling people and their lives, and to embezzle their wealth, and so we shouldn't fall for these lies. Obviously, if the Muslim rulers, Muslim health authorities, they implement these things because they believe in them, then we have to respect. Obviously, we have to respect, and we act in a way that we don't disturb the order or the security. And that's from the Sunnah anyway. There's no question about this in any case. But we cannot be forced to believe what are obvious falsehoods, what are blatant lies, right? Because this then is like to demean yourself and to belittle yourself and to lose your sense of dignity and honor, that you are believing clear, blatant falsehoods which you know to be false. So this is a matter of dignity and honor, right? And it enters into these issues of perfection of Tawheed when you start fearing, healthy people for no reason, right? So anyhow, that's like a related issue to the issue of khawf. The final thing is at-taqwa, very quickly. وَمِنْهَا التَّقْوَى تَعَبُّدًا وَتَقَرُّبًا. Right, so taqwa is obviously to fear Allah, similar to khawf. He brings some proofs. وَإِيَّايَ فَاتَّقُونَ. So me alone should you fear. أَفَغَيْرَ اللَّهِ تَتَّقُونَ. Is it besides Allah that you fear? يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا اتَّقُوا اللَّهَ وَقُولُوا قَوْلًا سَدِيدًا. O you who believe, fear Allah and say an upright word, to the end of the ayah. So here taqwa is very similar to the previous one. تَقَرُّبًا وَتَعَبُّدًا. It has a very similar discussion. Yes, in the worldly affairs we might have fear of things, but that is not out of tadallul and ta'abbud, as it is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we obey Allah and we do taqwa, it is because we want to seek nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So this really has the same discussion as al-khawf and khashya. This brings us to an end of this entire section. Right? So this entire section was on Tawheed al-uluhiyyah,